The chandeliers glittered above me as though nothing in the world could fracture their light. Music swelled. Laughter spilled across the ballroom, and yet I stood frozen in the center of it all. My sister's voice slicing through the celebration. "Give me the penthouse keys. Naomi." Her words were sharp enough to still the chatter of 280 guests. Some clutched champagne flutes mid-air. Others glanced between us, unsure if they had heard correctly. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, the weight of every eye pressing down. That place was Uncle David's legacy, I said, steady but quiet. It belongs to me. Vivian's face, framed by her veil, twisted with something uglier than surprise. "You're too young to waste it. You don't even deserve it." I shook my head, the silk of my dress rustling faintly as if to remind me I was still part of this wedding, still a guest, still her sister. But Vivian stepped closer, eyes blazing, and before I could move, her hand cracked across my cheek. The sound echoed louder than the string quartet. My glasses flew to the floor and skidded across the polished tiles. The entire room went silent except for the pounding in my ears. Pain blossomed on my skin, but the deeper wound was the gasps around me, friends, colleagues, even relatives watching without stepping forward. I bent to retrieve my glasses, hands trembling, vision blurred. When I rose again, Vivian stood tall in her white lace, smoothing her gown as though nothing had happened. "You're not welcome here anymore," she declared, her voice ringing clear as crystal. I swallowed the burn in my throat, straightened my back, and walked toward the grand doors. Not one guest stopped me. My heels clicked against the marble, each step heavier than the last until the night air hit me outside. On the sidewalk beneath the plaza's golden awning, I pulled out my phone. My fingers shook as I dialed the number I had avoided for months. "Michael," I whispered when he answered. "Bring the documents. To the plaza. Now." I ended the call and stared at the revolving doors behind me, knowing that in 30 minutes, the evening would no longer belong to my sister. It would belong to the truth. As I stood beneath the plaza's awning, the cold from the marble steps climbing into my bones, memories began pressing forward. They always did when Vivian cornered me, wearing that smile that others mistook for charm. "You're too young for that place," she'd said more times than I could count. At first, it was almost teasing an older sister joking about how her little sibling lived like a Wall Street executive. But soon, the tone sharpened. "You can't handle the upkeep. A penthouse isn't some college studio you lucked into." At Sunday dinners, what began as casual conversation turned into ambushes. Vivian and her fiancé would speak as if I wasn't in the room. Naomi should sell and invest in something sensible, she'd say over roast chicken, while her fiancé nodded. The market's hot. She'd be crazy not to cash out. My fork would hang in midair, my parents shifting uncomfortably as if they wanted to change the subject but didn't dare. The words burrowed into me. I was 29, yes, and the youngest in the family to own anything close to a penthouse. Sometimes I wondered if they were right. The elevator repairs, the constant association fees, the unspoken expectation that I didn't belong among neighbors who were decades older and wealthier. It wore on me. I began to shrink at gatherings, avoiding mention of my home, keeping my keys tucked deep in my purse like they were something shameful. When Vivian leaned close at one family birthday and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll help you make the right decision when the time comes," I almost believed she meant well. But now, after the slap, after the silence of hundreds of guests watching me fall, I could see every remark for what it had been: not guidance, not sisterly concern, but erosion. Slowly, deliberately. She had been chiseling away at my confidence until tonight, when she finally struck in front of everyone. I pressed the phone tighter in my hand. 30 minutes. Michael would be here. And when he arrived, the years of quiet insults and false advice would meet the truth I had kept hidden. When Uncle David died, I was 24 and still drafting blueprints in a tiny Brooklyn studio. He had been more than an uncle. He was the one who encouraged me through architecture school, who sat with me at night sketching impossible skylines just to see how far imagination could stretch. I never expected him to leave me his penthouse overlooking Central Park. At the reading of his will, even my parents looked stunned. David had made his money quietly, developing small but significant urban projects in Queens and the Bronx. He hated extravagance, which was why he lived modestly until the last decade of his life. But he told me once, during a walk along Riverside Drive, this space belongs to someone who sees the city as possibility, not profit. You'll know what to do with it when the time comes. The gift came wrapped not only in walls of glass and stone, but also in paper, dozens of documents filed in a trust he had set up years earlier. Michael Rowan, his lawyer, explained each clause patiently, though at the time I barely understood. Buried in that language was something David had insisted on, a protection known as a bad actor clause. If any relative attempted to coerce, threaten, or undermine me regarding the property, they would automatically be removed from any share of the broader family trust. For years, I kept that binder hidden in my desk drawer, sealed and almost forgotten, like an insurance policy I hoped never to use. To bring it forward meant exposing family secrets, dragging private grievances into the light. I told myself Vivian's comments weren't serious, that she was just lashing out, that we could still be sisters without bringing lawyers into it. But tonight, my cheek still stinging, I realized David had foreseen this. He knew family greed could be sharper than any stranger's blade. The documents were not just legal armor, they were his way of protecting me when he no longer could. The real question was whether I had the courage to wield them. 30 minutes from now, the choice would no longer be hypothetical. I could already hear the shuffle of polished shoes approaching from the curb. The phone felt heavier than it should, slick in my hand as if even the night air wanted to wrest it away. Michael's voice answered steady as always, the same voice that had walked me through Uncle David's will 5 years ago. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Bring the binder, I said, the one with the trust papers, to the plaza, tonight. He didn't ask why. He only paused long enough for me to hear the hum of his office lamp through the receiver. I'll be there in 30 minutes. When the call ended, silence wrapped around me. The plaza's revolving doors spun with guests coming and going, their laughter muffled behind glass. I stayed on the steps, the imprint of Vivian's hand still warm on my cheek. Rage burned in one corner of me. How dare she humiliate me in front of everyone? But grief pressed in from the other side. The weight of what this meant. Once Michael arrived, there would be no pretending it was just another family quarrel. I tried to breathe, but every inhale tasted like betrayal. My own sister, the girl who once braided my hair before high school dances, had turned me into an obstacle to be removed. Somewhere inside me, a younger version of myself still wanted her approval, still longed for the easy laughter we used to share. But the slap had broken something beyond repair. My fingers tightened around the strap of my purse as headlights swept across the curb. I knew Michael's car would be next, the moment it arrived. The night would belong not to Vivian's wedding, but to the truth David had left behind, waiting for me to claim it. Michael arrived with the precision of someone who had lived his life on deadlines. His gray suit was unremarkable, but the leather binder in his hand drew every eye as we re-entered the ballroom. The music faltered, the quartet lowering their bows mid-note, conversations stilled as he stepped forward, calm as if this were a boardroom instead of a wedding. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice carrying easily in the gilded hall. "I apologize for the interruption, but I have urgent business with Ms. Naomi Alton and Mrs. Vivian Dwyer." Gasps rippled. Vivian froze near the head table, her new husband clutching her arm. I stood a few paces back, my pulse thrumming, as Michael opened the binder and began, "As counsel to the late David Alton, I am here to announce the withdrawal of all financial guarantees previously extended in his niece's name." This includes the balance of tonight's reception. A murmur broke across the room. Waiters exchanged anxious glances. The manager of the plaza stepped forward. Uncertain. Vivian's smile wavered. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice pitched too high. Michael ignored her tone and laid out printouts on the head table screenshots of credit reports. Foreclosure notices, collection letters. These documents confirm significant outstanding debts under Mrs. Dwyer's name and her spouse's. More concerning are records of multiple attempts to duplicate keys for Ms. Alton's residence, as well as email correspondence implying intent to force a transfer of property. The whispers swelled into open chatter. Phones appeared in hands. Several guests began recording, angling for clear shots of the papers. Vivian lunged toward the table, knocking over a champagne flute, but her husband held her back. "That's a lie," she spat, but her voice cracked. She glanced around desperately, searching for allies, but found only cameras. I felt no triumph, only the ache of exposure. Every private humiliation, every whispered dig, was now public currency. Yet, as Michael closed the binder with deliberate finality, I realized there was no way back to silence. The mask Vivian had worn for years had split, and the fragments were cutting her before anyone else. She turned on me then, eyes wild, as the room waited for her next move. Vivian's panic hardened into fury. She pointed across the room, her veil trembling as she shook. "Don't believe her. Naomi is unstable. She's too young, reckless, unfit to manage anything, let alone a penthouse. She's been playing house in a property she can't possibly afford to keep." Her words were sharp enough to sting, and a few guests actually nodded, murmuring as if the idea held merit. I felt the blood drain from my face. For years, I had hidden how overwhelming the maintenance could be, how often I skipped dinners out to cover fees, how lonely the rooms felt at night. Maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't enough. Vivian seized the moment. She's living off scraps of an old man's fortune. She doesn't understand responsibility. She never has. Tonight, she's trying to ruin my wedding because she can't stand seeing me happy. The guests shifted, caught between scandal and sympathy. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. My throat tightened, the weight of their eyes pressing down harder than Vivian's slap ever had. Then, a voice rang out from the back. "That's enough." Heads turned as Aunt Margaret, cane tapping against the marble, stepped into the center. At 84, she carried the kind of authority that silenced a room. Her gaze swept over Vivian, then rested on me with quiet steadiness. "I heard you, Vivian," she said. "2 nights ago, in your parents' kitchen. You told your fiancé you'd have Naomi's keys before the honeymoon. You said you'd move in upstairs as soon as she broke." The murmurs turned. This time, they weren't against me. Vivian blanched, her mouth opening and closing, but no words formed. I inhaled, the knot in my chest loosening as Margaret's hand brushed my shoulder. For the first time that night, I wasn't standing alone, and I could feel the balance shifting. Aunt Margaret didn't just stand on her word. She reached into her handbag, pulled out her phone, and held it up. "I recorded the voicemail," she said, her voice carrying with the weight of someone who had seen too much to be ignored. With a few taps, Vivian's voice filled the ballroom, tinny but unmistakable. "Don't worry, the recording played. I'll have Naomi's keys before we're back from the honeymoon. Moving in upstairs will solve everything." Gasps rose from the tables. Some guests covered their mouths, others leaned in closer, hungry for every word. Vivian lunged forward, hissing, "That's private," but it was too late. The sound of her own voice betrayed her more loudly than anything I could have said. Before she could recover, Michael lifted another document from his binder. "We also have testimony from the building manager at Central Park West. He received a written request under Mrs. Dwyer's signature to duplicate Ms. Alton's penthouse keys. The request was flagged for irregularities and denied. We have retained the original for the court. The manager himself stepped forward from the crowd, a stout man in a blazer who had clearly been waiting for this moment. "That's right," he said, voice firm. "I called Naomi that day because it didn't feel right. The signature was sloppy, and the urgency she said she needed keys before the wedding made me suspicious." Vivian's new husband tried to speak, but his face gave him away first. Red blotches crept up his neck, and sweat beaded on his forehead. Someone from his side of the family whispered, "The loans. Oh, God, the loans." He turned sharply to Vivian, his whisper too loud not to carry. "They know. Viv, they know about the defaults, about the bank letters." The crowd erupted in low voices, the atmosphere shifting from disbelief to recognition. The perfect image Vivian had crafted, designer dress, golden hair, confident smile crumbled before us all. I stood motionless, heart steady for the first time that night. Piece by piece, the truth was stacking higher than her excuses could reach, and it was only a matter of time before the final blow landed. Michael's voice cut through the rising chaos with the calm certainty of law. He opened the binder once more and read aloud the clause Uncle David had insisted upon. "Any heir who attempts to coerce, threaten, or manipulate Naomi Alton in relation to the Central Park West property shall be deemed a bad actor and immediately removed from any share of the Alton family trust." The words fell like stones in water, sending ripples through the crowd. Vivian's face drained of color. For years, she had counted on the trust as her safety net, the one thing that would shield her from the mountain of debt she and her husband had built. Now, with a few sentences, the rope had been cut. "No," she whispered at first, then louder, until her voice cracked. "No, please, I didn't mean it like that. I was scared. Naomi, I just wanted to feel secure, to know I wouldn't lose everything again." Her hands trembled as she reached toward me, her veil slipping askew. "You're my sister. You can't take this from me. You know I've always struggled. Please, I was desperate." Her words pierced deeper than I wanted to admit. We had shared a bedroom as children, whispered secrets under blankets, laughed until our sides ached. For a moment, I saw not the woman who had slapped me, but the girl who once braided my hair before picture day. But that girl had grown into someone willing to humiliate me in front of hundreds, willing to forge signatures and plot behind my back. My throat tightened, but my decision held. "I didn't take anything from you," I said quietly. "You gave it up the moment you chose greed over family." Vivian crumpled into her husband's arms, sobbing, as guests pulled out their phones to capture the final unraveling. Michael closed the binder with a firm snap, and I felt the weight of Uncle David's foresight resting solidly in my hands. The penthouse was mine to protect, but more than that, so was my dignity. The night wasn't over yet, but the battle for my home had just been won. By morning, my phone was flooded with notifications, clips from the ballroom. Vivian's slap, Michael's declaration. My words circulated online under headlines I never asked for, the sister who fought back. Commenters turned me into a symbol of dignity fights back, though all I had wanted was to survive one night without losing myself. News outlets reached out, some praising my resolve, others feasting on the spectacle. I ignored them all. The penthouse had never felt quieter. I changed the locks the next day, the new keys cold and unfamiliar in my hand. For the first time in months, I slept with the windows open, the city hum below reminding me I still belonged. Meanwhile, Vivian and her husband unraveled quickly. Eviction notices, lawsuits from creditors, whispers in social circles that once applauded them, it all collapsed in days. I watched from a distance, heart heavy even in vindication. She had chosen this path, but she was still my sister. I spent long evenings pacing the penthouse, asking myself whether winning meant anything if it left me standing alone. Childhood memories surfaced in sharp contrast: birthday candles we once blew out together, promises we made when our parents divorced. They felt like photographs left too long in the sun, fading until only the outlines remained. Yet when I touched the trust documents stacked neatly on my desk, I felt Uncle David's steady presence. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting the life I had built, the home entrusted to me. I sat at the window that night, lights of the city glittering against the glass. The world now saw me as a figure of strength, but inside I wrestled with the silence family leaves behind. And in that silence, I began to wonder what came next. Months passed before I could walk into the penthouse without feeling the echo of that night. The ballroom confrontation had branded me as something larger than myself, but I knew the story couldn't end there. Uncle David had trusted me with more than real estate. He had trusted me to use my voice, with Michael's help. I established the Alton Young Voices Fund, a foundation dedicated to helping young women secure and defend the property or assets left to them. Too many were told they were too young, too naive, or too unprepared. Just as Vivian had told me, applications came from across the country, a 23-year-old in Chicago defending her grandmother's duplex, a law student in Dallas fighting her uncle's claim to farmland. Reading their letters, I saw reflections of my own fear and found purpose in guiding them through it. The penthouse became not a fortress, but a workshop. We hosted small gatherings, strategy sessions, quiet circles where women shared stories they had been too ashamed to tell. Each time, I felt the space transform from a contested prize into a place of strength. One evening, after the last of the group had left, I stood by the front door. On the wall beside it hung a small brass hook. I placed a single key there not to remind me of what others had tried to take, but to remind myself of what I chose to keep. It was no longer a symbol of fear, but of respect, hard-won and non-negotiable. Keys open doors. Only respect lets you live inside.